and I will introduce our first session of the day, which is Bernard Grenier, who is Director of DPC, and Roux, Senior Director of Technical Design at Gap. Bernard and Roz, over to you.
Good morning from New York. We are going to fix that. Hold on.
Hi, all. I think both Raj and Ben are muted right now. So,
I apologize for that. Didn't intend to mute myself. No, we couldn't hear you there for a second, Roz and Bernard. But we're over to you if you can unmute yourselves.
How about now? Are you okay?
That is perfect.
Fantastic. I love a early morning sound check and glad to get going. Greetings from New York. I will pass over to Roz Roux, who will tell you who we are.
Hi, everyone. Greetings. So I am the Senior Director of Technical Design, DPC, and PI for our global sourcing hub offices. And Bernard is the Director of GIS, which is our hub offices, DPC. So we want to talk a little bit about, who are we? So we're really, we're a $16 billion company. We represent 4 brands. So, we're inclusive by design. We have our Old Navy brand, which is our value chain brand. We have the Gap brand, which is our heritage brand. It's Americana. We have Banana Republic, which is our luxury brand. And then we have Athleta, which is our performance brand. We roughly have around 120 vendors. We're in 25 countries, and we work with about 400 mills. So that's really our landscape. And this is, we're sort of the conduit between the 4 brands. We're the 5th pillar, if you will, managing globally across all of our hub offices and bringing that vendor community and mill community together with our brands. We oversee all the digital product creation governance. We manage and set the virtual quality standards. We train our vendors, and we maintain compliance across the vendor landscape. So, one of the things that is really key for us is obviously the partnerships that we have built over the years with all of our vendors. And we rely heavily on that because in this new space, really what's happened over the years is that the expertise really remains or has shifted and transitioned into that vendor base, right? So when you think about pattern making and sample making, that's all moved offshore. We no longer have sample rooms, in our US offices. So we rely on them to make physical samples. And then in the DPC space, most of our vendors are, 10 to 15 years into the digital product creation journey. So they are really the experts. And we are, at this point, heavily reliant on them. And then really working together with them to empower them in a very different way. So in the past, we spoke about, we work as a partner, but partnership in today's world is really taking them in under our wing and making them part of our team. So having that the customer vision as being a shared a goal and a training where we really have that as our North Star. And we're working with top-notch vendors, right? So ultimately, they're coming to the table with expertise that we haven't even tapped into yet.
So let's talk for a moment about the workflow that we're stepping away from. It's a physical sample workflow that relies entirely on one action happening, which prompts another action, which prompts the next action, which prompts the next action, and the next. There are different partners who jump into that workflow at different times. They've got to wait for everyone else to get in line and to do their part in the right time. It's a workflow that's filled with duplicative effort. There's no way around it. You've got to wait for that physical sample. You've got to wait for the evaluation of the physical sample. You've got to pass that information back to the vendor, and it comes back to the brand. It's a workflow that has worked in this industry for a long time, but we're moving into a new environment. The good news is 3D technology is no longer something new. It's no longer tomorrow. It's today. It's where we're standing today. It's how we're facing dealing with our customer base and with our vendors who supply us with all of the product. What we're moving into is a collaborative workflow with one source of truth. Now, there's a new partnership that's built with a collaborative workflow. We're bringing in visibility early on in the pipeline to the marketing team, to the photography team, to web teams, and most importantly, to customers. It's these customers who benefit from this collaborative workflow that gives visibility to the product, and in many cases, the voice of the customer. How soon can we put digital assets in front of customers to get feedback from them? That's what's very important. It's a whole new world, and we're very excited to be stepping into it.
So when we think about an end-to-end digital workflow, obviously the starting point would be the same, where we need to have an initial asset created. But the path that we go on to really get to that end state, if you want to think of it as kind of a fork, we really need to create the asset in the initial stages, and we rely predominantly on our vendors to do that work. There is the new product that is created from concept, so where design comes up with a design brief, and then our vendors who need to create patterns and then stitch the assets. Some of the work where we get into the modify of a block or a reference pattern, that work we would do in-house or with the vendor, depending on the complexity or the time, the speed that we need things to be initiated. And then we have the carryover styles, which of course, in this sense, it's faster to iterate, within the brands. And then as we sort of go through this, going on the fork, the bottom end goes down to, the fitting process and how we get to a final approved sample. And then on the top fork, we go through, using our digital assets for marketing, for voice of the customer, for testing, A/B testing on our websites. But really, the important piece of this is that we build a library of all of our basically TOPs that we can use over and over for our ongoing seasons.
So let's talk for a moment about the foundations of digital product creation. It's something that we at GIS, DPC, are at the center of. We're at the intersection of all of this function. Our first foundational piece are Alvenon avatars that are very important to us. A lot of the quality is based on fit, and it's what the customer expects from us. What's been great about working with Alvenon is that they offer a very reliable tool to help us build our digital strategy.
So when we think about what are the foundations that we need, it's the same as in the physical world, where the starting point would be the block pattern libraries. And so the most successful digital tools are based off of building out the block libraries that we have already in fit approved in the physical world, that we have all of our partners align on. So our cross-functional merchandisers and design partners. And then, we create those in a digital world. And we know that the fit is already good. So that would be our foundational building block to really build out our product from. So obviously not everything can be built from a block. And in many cases, design, taps into reference patterns, which could have been, a seasonal product from an earlier season that has been successful, or that represents they want to build off of something that is more of a fashion piece. And so then it makes more sense to go to a reference pattern. And that is why keeping these libraries of TOPs, if you will, in digital format is so critical, because the iteration process then becomes much faster if you're starting from a reference pattern versus going all the way back to a block every time.
And the last piece of this puzzle, these foundational elements, are digitized fabric libraries. So here at Gap Inc., we have an enormous fabric library that we have launched digitization of. Several fabrics, whether they're seasonal fabrics or platform fabrics at each brand. And we have a three-pronged approach to building these libraries. The first is utilizing an internal fabric digitization team, which works with both the Clo Fabric Kit and the Browseware Fab Analyzer, as well as the Visu tool. The next piece of it is working with accredited mills and vertical vendors who have the capability of digitizing fabrics and have gone through the accreditation process, meaning they're following our standards. We're doing it exactly the same way, utilizing the same tools, or getting the same results with a variety of tools. And the third part is an accredited third-party fabric digitization. That's a third-party vendor that we have partnered with for a while to digitize some of our fabrics to help us build consistency and to build our libraries fast. All four of these pieces, the Alvanon avatars, the block library, the reference patterns, and the digitized fabric libraries are tools that we maintain and curate and share with our vendor base. Now, Rozh mentioned these work streams before, but I'm going to go a little bit more into them. What's the point of these three work streams: new, modify, and carryover? The new style is something that's brand new, doesn't have an existing silhouette, requires a lot of pattern making, and that's something that we rely on the vendor to create for us. We give them a design brief, and they create the pattern for us, supply us with a virtual sample. The modify sample is something that we build in-house based on existing bodies or existing digital samples. These are simple modifications that can be executed by either the design team or the technical design team. It's a change in the hemline. It's a change in the sleeve. It's adding a pocket. In this example, it's a raglan sleeve sweatshirt that's turned into a raglan sleeve baseball shirt with a pocket, with a logo. It's something that our teams can easily manage with not a lot of training and just a little experience inside the tool. The last piece of this puzzle is the carryover. It's taking something from our 3D TOP library and putting in the new colorways for the season. With these three digital workflows, these work streams that are executed by different teams during the same period of time, it allows us to spread out the amount of work that's required for a full line adoption meeting that includes carryover items with all the new colors, all the new styles, and all the new prints. It spreads out the workflow, which takes some of the pressure off of the vendor on the front end and gives more of a hand in designing the modify examples to the design teams and the TD teams who partner with them. With these three work streams, we are very confident that we're able to get to a line adoption level of 100% saturation with the product. And that's what's really important. That's when you can start cutting physical samples, when you're doing a line adoption in full 3D utilizing these three work streams.
So why don't you just tie in this cultivation, creating a culture of more of collaboration. So up to this point, we have been working in a silo complex. So very much departments, if you think of the initial slide that Bernard showed with the linear work stream, where it's one department works on something and passes it off to another and passes it off to another. So it's very singular, and it's in many cases, it's not as collaborative as it needs to be, because one group is just working on completing a deadline and then handing it off. And so when you look at this, you've got all these different groups that are working in these silos, and the relationship that we have with the vendors is that we push out information to them. And so it doesn't really create this dynamic of partnership. And it's a very one-way workflow. So if we think about how do we really collaborate with them and bring them into our environment and really become part of our workflow, one has to really think about what a village would look like, and how that would the interaction between the different departments and the different the back and forth between the vendor becomes integral to that workflow, and it's really interconnected. And you see in this image even, right, that's where we start to really create that environment and that culture of true collaboration and teamwork. And we really start to see each other as partners, where we would not let one down. But the interaction becomes a lot more agile and flexible. And, in this work stream is where we start to push out this hierarchy of approval process and push it down and flatten it out, right? So that it becomes much more flexible and agile, and we can get to an approval in a much shorter timeline. And this is really critical for this new, this new workflow. And I think in the digital space where there's so much more shared information, we're sharing, our fabric libraries across our vendor bases instead of in the old, the previous way of working where it was very siloed. Information wasn't shared, right? So blocks weren't shared with other vendors, fabrics weren't shared with other vendors. But if we need to create dynamic work teams, there needs to be a platform where the information is available to our community of vendors. And that's where we really see a huge advantage to this DPC space, where, it's a share out.
So when we talk about vendor empowerment, that's something that we're very keen on here at Gap Inc. and with GIS DPC. Vendor empowerment to us means supplying them with all of the tools they need, all of the a magical toolbox that allows them to deliver to our expectations. One of those things that we like to provide our vendor base with is a very clear delineated roadmap. If we can give them as much information as possible, it allows them to be ready for us when we need them to be ready for us. So if you look at this slide here, there are 5 different categories launching in DPC at different times over the next 3 years. If we can share this kind of roadmap with our vendors, we're confident that they will be able to have the team necessary to supply us with the number of digital samples that we'll be requiring from them. And they'll be able to control their digital quality as they partner with us to build that digital quality more. Some of the virtual quality standards that we share with them are very detailed vendor 3D manuals, that talk about, pattern pieces, how we'd like them arranged, how we'd like to archive our pattern pieces, what avatars are utilized, what CLO details, or in some cases, what browseware details are required inside of the project file. We want to make sure that when they deliver those virtual samples to us, they deliver them in a manner that we expect to see them. We're stepping into DPC in a very big way at Gap Inc. at all 4 brands, all at one time. Some of our vendors cover 2, 3, and in some cases, 4 of these brands. So they are going on this digital workflow journey with all 4 brands who are operating at similar but different paces into how they're scaling their roadmaps. once we've established these virtual quality standards with our vendors, the way that we sort of monitor and deal with compliance is by dealing with vendor KPIs and giving them a vendor evaluation that everybody who has visibility on the virtual sample impacts. So here's an example of all of the vendors that we've evaluated in the past. I won't list the names here, but if you look at this chart, you'll see that some vendors started out on the bronze level and stepped up into silver. We have all-star vendors at Gap Inc. We are very fortunate. The big headline really is the vendors are ready for all of us to step into DPC. Many of the very big vendors have been into digital product creation for 10 to 15 years. They were early adopters. Many of their customers have stepped into digital product creation. And you can see the benefits of that in this chart. When most of these vendors on their first time out for an evaluation of their virtual quality scored a silver or a gold. That's kind of amazing. We're in a very good place when it comes to vendor capability and being able to rely on our vendor base to supply us with high quality virtual samples, whether they're in Browseware or they're in Clo. We are very secure that they're there to support us. Something else that these vendor KPIs allow us to do is to coach them into a better performance. In this case, with the vendors that we started out with, most of them really scored very well, and there was very little instance for coaching vendors into a better performance. When someone comes in at a bronze level or at a red level, that's definitely a flag for us to start coaching them on virtual quality standards. And in that opportunity, the GIS TD team will coach each of the vendors depending on the region. So they're coached from bronze to silver for vendor A. And for vendor F, it was the same circumstance. They did so well after coaching that the next time they were evaluated, they were gold. We had one vendor who actually failed on the first time out. They were not successful at complying with any of our standards or delivering virtual quality that we needed. But after coaching over 30 days, they were able to come in at gold. So it's a great opportunity to utilize this vendor scorecard to some degree to coach our vendors who need coaching into delivering higher quality standards. When we come to the criteria for quality standards, there are three different areas that we look at when we're evaluating our vendor base. One is compliance to the vendor 3D manual, which details all of the quality standards that we require for delivery of digital assets. That's executed by GIS DPC. The next area of criteria is the design evaluation. What's that first impression? What does that virtual proto sample look like? Does it resemble the source material, the tier sheet? Does it deliver exactly what the design team expected based on the information that they gave them? And the final piece of this is the technical design evaluation, which dives deeper into the project file. It relates to digital fit. It relates to the interaction that comes from annotations shared with the vendor and requests for revisions that are made with the vendor. All three of these criteria come to a sum that gives us an evaluation of what that vendor is like. The evaluation cadence is quarterly. If someone reaches gold for 2 seasons in a row, we let them coast. We still evaluate them, but we don't have coaching involved with them. We focus our coaching on the bronze and red level vendors. The red level vendors, in our case, there are many vendors out there who either have not stepped into digital product creation yet, or they've been working with different tools than we require at Gap Inc. They need a little more care, a little more hand-holding. I've actually been surprised with some of the vendors who have onboarded with the 3D tools of choice that we've asked them to onboard with, at how successful they've been at translating a high skill level in one tool to a high skill level in another. It's been great to see, great to watch, and it's made the people at the brands very happy that they've adjusted so quickly.
So what are the savings? I think this is the big elephant in the room, because when we look at, when we talk about where did we really save money, and I think here is a good analysis of that. It's not necessarily a dollar-to-dollar savings. So there's time, and within that, for both physical and digital product creation, we need a pattern. So that's the starting point. That's the basis of it. And then, just as you would in a physical world, you need to stitch the asset. So you have either a sample room operator stitching a physical sample, or you have a 3D artist stitching the asset. And when we take into account the manpower, it's not necessarily cheaper, because 3D artists tend to cost more. The labor is higher than somebody who is a sample maker. So up to this point, when you think about cost savings, it's actually costing slightly more. When we get into the sample yardage, most companies have set up sample yardage from a perspective of it's absorbed into the total cost of business, and what a vendor, your relationship with the vendor absorbs that cost into the entire season or annual workflow and amount of products that you give them. So there's not a dollar-to-dollar saving there. There's certainly a huge saving when it comes to fit model fees. As we know, fit models tend to run anything from $300 to $350 an hour, especially in the big cities, New York, LA, San Francisco. So there's definitely a cost savings there. But I think when we look at the end-to-end process, the bigger goal should really be about sustainability. And that's kind of the driving force behind this. That ultimately we should be looking for a North Star goal that brings this product, digital product creation, to life. So yes, there's a time savings that we can create and iterate much faster in digital. I think that when we think about the end use of digital products, when we put it out into the market and test product and really get clear analytics of what the customer wants to purchase, it ties back into the sustainability goals, right? How do we really save on just putting product out there that sits then in inventory and becomes landfill in the end of the day? And so ultimately, we should really be looking at this entire end-to-end process much more holistically, and not just from an initial upfront savings to the cost of developing product, but a more a global aspect of what this means to the entire garment industry and what we put back into our end-to-end process.
So with that, I'd like to thank you for giving us the time to share our GIS DPC perspective and our journey in partnering with our vendor base as we scale into a much greater digital future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Thank you very much, Rozh. Really appreciate that perspective. And for me, the key part there is that the vendor base in general has the capabilities to respond to the demands of a company like GIS, right? They may not have the specific tools at hand. They, like as you said, they may be used to using a different environment. They may have different demands across other customers. But broadly speaking, there are digital capabilities that brands can rely on that exist in the supply chain. And I think that's a very strong message, because there's a lot that the industry there's an impression in the industry sometimes that brands have to pull the supply chain chain by the nose to try and convince them to move over towards digitization. Whereas I think the way that you're looking at it is very healthy, which is to say, we have standards, we have a certain level that we need to hit, we have certain environments and certain things that we need to work towards. But broadly speaking, you are reliant on a skill set that is already there.
Yeah, we're very lucky. Our vendor base has been trained by, I'll say it, a lot of our competitors who may have stepped into digital product creation before we did. We've inherited a highly skilled vendor base who are early adopters. So it's a fantastic piece of the puzzle. What our next challenge is the change management, changing how we work and changing how we address this new digital workflow.
No, that's perfect. And we did have a very quick question from the audience, which I think is, they were asking what other criteria you might use to select a vendor beyond DPC. And I think maybe a way to frame that would be almost at the hierarchical kind of selection, where you would say, well, how important is DPC in the ranking of criteria that you might use to choose a vendor?
I would safely say that it's becoming an absolute entry point for a vendor, and we haven't got there right now. But I think as we track our KPIs across multiple different areas for a vendor. So there's the sustainability piece. We have this PACE program. There's a huge a quality. There's 30% of ours. We base on the overarching execution that vendors put out. But I think that this DPC will become a part of that holistic criteria that we use to evaluate whether we should be working with a vendor or not.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much. Now, I know we have our next set of speakers lined up. I know we've run a few minutes late there. So, Bernard and Rozh, thank you very much for your time.